My beloved child. There are moments in life when words remain hidden, not because they were never written, but because the heart that wrote them could not bear the thought of them being misunderstood. This is one of those moments. Somewhere between silence and hope, a letter came into existence, a letter that was never meant for the world to read. It carried no audience, no applause, no expectation. It carried only one name in every unspoken sentence: yours. Don't skip, because the meaning of those pages does not reveal itself all at once. It arrives gently, like the first light touching a quiet morning, asking only for your patience. The letter did not begin with grand promises. It began with hesitation. The kind of hesitation that belongs to someone who has rehearsed the same confession 1,000 times but still wonders whether the right words truly exist. Every line was started, crossed out, and written again, not because the feelings changed, but because none of the words seemed worthy enough to describe what had quietly grown inside their heart. If you could have watched that moment unfold, you would have seen long pauses between every sentence, as though each breath carried another memory they were deciding whether to share or keep hidden forever. What makes this letter different is not its length. It is what was left between the lines. There are spaces where no ink appears, yet somehow those empty spaces speak louder than the words themselves. They whisper about evenings spent wondering if your paths would ever truly meet. They speak of ordinary moments that became unforgettable for reasons no one else would understand. They reveal that sometimes the smallest memory becomes the safest place for a heart that has nowhere else to rest. Something important is waiting for you, but it is not the kind of revelation that shouts for attention. It waits quietly, knowing that the deepest truths are never in a hurry. As the pages unfolded, one realization appeared again and again without ever being written directly: some people change your life long before they officially become part of it. Long before conversations become frequent. Long before plans are made. Long before either person fully understands why one name keeps returning to the mind during the quietest hours. There was one paragraph they almost removed entirely. Their hand lingered over it for a long time, uncertain whether honesty would bring relief or vulnerability. That paragraph held a simple admission. They had imagined countless futures, but every version that brought genuine peace somehow included you. Not because life would suddenly become perfect, but because your presence had become the place where their restless thoughts finally slowed down. They wondered if such a feeling should remain a secret forever, or if silence would become the greater regret. Stay till the end, because this is only the beginning of what those pages carry. The most meaningful sentence was not written in the center of the letter where anyone might expect it. It was carefully hidden where only a patient heart would discover it. Almost as though they believed that whoever truly cared enough to keep reading would eventually find the message meant only for them. And then something unexpected happened. Just as they reached the point where the letter should have revealed everything, the pen stopped moving. Not because the feelings disappeared, but because another memory entered their mind, changing the direction of every word that followed. That single memory transformed the letter into something far more personal than they had ever planned, and the next page holds the one confession they never thought they would have the courage to leave behind. A quiet truth often waits until the exact moment when the heart is ready to receive it. That is why the next page was never rushed. It almost seemed as though the letter itself wanted you to slow down, to notice the gentle rhythm between every sentence. If you read too quickly, you might miss what mattered most. Don't skip, because the words ahead were written with extraordinary care, and every pause carries meaning that cannot be replaced. The first line on that page was surprisingly simple. I almost convinced myself that staying silent would be kinder. Nothing dramatic followed it. No overwhelming confession. Just an honest thought from someone who had spent far too long wondering whether their feelings belonged in the light or should remain tucked away where no one could ever question them. Yet the more they wrote, the more their uncertainty began to soften. It was as though every sentence gave them a little more courage than the one before. Then they described a memory so ordinary that most people would have forgotten it within a day. A brief conversation. A shared smile. A quiet moment when nothing remarkable seemed to happen. And yet, for them, that single moment became the beginning of everything. They admitted they had replayed it countless times, discovering new meaning in details that no one else would have noticed. They wondered if you remembered it too, or if it had quietly become one of those beautiful moments carried by only one heart. There was no attempt to impress you. No perfect phrases. In fact, several sentences wandered, almost as though they were thinking aloud instead of writing. That honesty gave the letter its warmth. It no longer felt like something carefully prepared. It felt alive. It felt real. It felt like someone finally allowing another person to see the parts of themselves they usually kept hidden behind calm smiles and ordinary conversations. Something important is waiting for you, because halfway through the page, the tone changed without warning. They stopped writing about memories and began writing about hope. Not the loud kind that demands immediate answers, but the quiet kind that patiently believes tomorrow can hold something beautiful even when today remains uncertain. They wrote that hope had a way of returning every time your name crossed their mind, and they could never fully explain why. One sentence stood alone, separated from every other paragraph, as though it deserved its own moment of silence. You never asked me to carry these feelings, but somehow they became the safest part of my heart. They stared at those words for a long time before deciding not to erase them. Perhaps they realized that truth, even when vulnerable, has its own gentle strength. As the page neared its end, the handwriting became noticeably slower. The letters stretched wider. The spaces between the words grew longer. It almost looked as if they were trying to delay reaching the next page because they knew what waited there would change everything. Their hand paused one final time before adding a small note near the bottom. If you have reached this point, then perhaps you are ready for the part one have never spoken aloud. Stay till the end, because the next page is unlike anything that came before. It does not simply continue the letter, it opens a chapter they once believed would remain locked inside their heart forever. The page that followed carried a different kind of silence. It was no longer the silence of uncertainty, it was the silence that comes after someone decides to stop hiding. The ink seemed steadier now, the handwriting calmer, as though the weight they had been carrying had finally begun to lift. If you looked closely, you could almost imagine the quiet breath they took before writing the very next sentence. Don't skip, because this is where the letter begins to reveal not just what they felt, but why those feelings never disappeared. I used to believe that time would gently erase your place in my heart. That was the first sentence. I thought distance would make everything ordinary again. I thought new routines would slowly replace the memories. I told myself that one day your name would simply become another passing thought. Then came a pause. But none of that happened. The words remained simple, yet they carried an honesty that could not be hidden behind beautiful language. They admitted they had tried to move forward in every practical way possible. They stayed busy. They smiled when people expected them to smile. They celebrated small victories and accepted ordinary disappointments. From the outside, everything appeared peaceful. Yet there was always one quiet space inside them that refused to change. Whenever something wonderful happened, they instinctively imagined telling you first. Whenever something difficult happened, your presence was the comfort their heart quietly searched for, even if no message was ever sent. They confessed that this realization frightened them at first, not because love felt overwhelming, but because it felt incredibly natural. It had settled into their life so gently that they almost failed to notice how deeply it had become part of who they were. Something important is waiting for you. The next paragraph wasn't about longing. It was about gratitude. I never thanked you. Those 4 words stood alone. I never thanked you for teaching me that peace can arrive through someone's kindness instead of grand gestures. I never thanked you for reminding me that being understood is sometimes more valuable than being admired. I never thanked you for simply existing in a way that quietly changed my own heart. The letter grew even more personal. They admitted there were nights when they wondered whether you had any idea how much your smallest actions had mattered. Perhaps you had forgotten conversations that they still remembered word for word. Perhaps moments that seemed ordinary to you had become treasured memories they carried without telling anyone. Stay till the end. Because just when it seemed the deepest confession had already been made, the letter took another unexpected turn. Near the bottom of the page, tucked between 2 gentle paragraphs, was a sentence written in noticeably smaller handwriting, as though they almost hoped it would remain unnoticed. I almost destroyed this letter yesterday. No explanation followed immediately. Only another long pause. Then one final line appeared beneath it. But something happened this morning that made me believe these words deserved one more chance to reach you. The page ended there. No description of what had happened. No clue. Only the promise that the next page would explain the one quiet moment that convinced them not to let this letter disappear forever. Morning arrived without ceremony. No extraordinary event. No dramatic sign. Just a quiet beginning that somehow carried enough meaning to change a decision that had almost been final. The letter explained that they had placed every page inside a drawer the night before, convinced it would remain there forever. They even whispered to themselves, "Some feelings are better left unread." But as dawn gently filled the room, something within them refused to let the story end in silence. I realized I wasn't afraid of my feelings, they wrote. I was only afraid that they might never reach the one person they belonged to. Don't skip, because what happened next was not loud enough for anyone else to notice, yet it became the turning point of the entire letter. They described making a cup of coffee, opening a nearby window, and watching the morning unfold. Everything outside looked wonderfully ordinary. A breeze moved through the trees. Birds greeted the new day without hurry. The world carried on exactly as it always had. Yet in that peaceful stillness, one unexpected thought arrived with complete clarity. If I never tell you the truth, then you will only know the version of me that learned how to stay quiet. That sentence lingered on the page as though it had waited a lifetime to be written. From that moment forward, the letter changed. It was no longer trying to protect itself. It was trying to become honest. I don't need perfect timing anymore, they admitted. I don't need every answer before I speak. I simply want the chance for my heart to be known exactly as it is. The handwriting grew softer again. I hope you never feel responsible for what I feel. Kindness should never become a burden. But I also hope you know that meeting you made me believe gentle hearts still exist. That gift alone has already changed my life. Something important is waiting for you. The next page held memories no one else had ever heard. Not grand adventures or unforgettable celebrations, but tiny moments collected one by one like precious keepsakes. The way you listened without rushing. The way your words stayed with them long after conversations ended. The way simple acts of kindness quietly became reasons to believe that genuine connection still exists. I never told anyone about these memories, they confessed. People would probably laugh because they seem so small. But love has always noticed what the world rushes past. For the first time, the letter stopped speaking about the past. It began speaking about tomorrow. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know whether our paths will become closer or remain quietly distant. But I do know this. I would rather live with an honest heart than with endless questions about what might have been. Stay till the end, because just when the letter seemed complete, they unfolded one final sheet that had been hidden beneath all the others. Unlike every previous page, this one wasn't filled with paragraphs. It held only a few carefully written lines. At the top, they wrote, "If you have read everything before this, then you are ready for the only words I have never spoken to anyone." Beneath that sentence was a folded note sealed with a single handwritten mark. The seal wasn't there to keep secrets from the world. It was there because what waited inside was the one confession they believed should only be opened by the person they had been writing to all along. For a long while, the folded note remained untouched within the letter, almost as though even the person who had written it needed one last moment of courage. Every page before it had been preparing for this quiet encounter. Every memory, every pause, every carefully chosen sentence had gently led here. Yet the final note did not rush to reveal itself. It seemed to wait for a heart willing to read it slowly. Don't skip, because what was written inside was not extraordinary because of dramatic words. It was extraordinary because nothing in it was hidden anymore. The fold opened. The handwriting was smaller than before, softer, almost as if these words had been whispered onto the paper instead of written. If these pages have found you, then perhaps life has been kinder to us than I ever expected. There was another pause. I have imagined this moment so many times that I almost forgot real moments are never perfect. They don't arrive with music. They don't pause the world. They simply appear, quietly, asking only to be received. The letter continued. I spent so much time wondering whether I should tell you how deeply you've touched my life. Then I realized something unexpected. My greatest fear was never rejection. My greatest fear was allowing a beautiful truth to disappear without ever giving it a voice. Those words seemed lighter than everything written before them. Not because the feelings had become smaller. Because they had finally become free. Something important is waiting for you. The next lines were unlike anything else in the letter. They weren't describing love. They were describing admiration. I admire the calm you carry without realizing it. I admire the kindness you offer without expecting anything in return. I admire the way people feel comfortable around you, even if they never tell you. I admire the quiet strength that appears when others need it most. You probably don't notice these things about yourself. But someone has. The page grew silent again. Then another sentence appeared. Perhaps that someone always will. For the first time, the writer admitted they had almost sent this letter many months earlier. They had even written your name on an envelope before carefully placing it away again. Not because their feelings changed but because they wanted the message to arrive when it carried peace instead of uncertainty. I never wanted these words to ask anything from you. I only wanted them to become true. Stay till the end. Because beneath those lines, there was one final section written on paper of a slightly different color. It looked newer. As though it had been added only yesterday. At the top of that page, one sentence immediately stood out. Everything you've read until now explains my heart, but the next page explains the promise I quietly made because of you. There was no signature beneath it. Only the faint outline of a pressed flower, carefully preserved between the pages as if it had been waiting all this time for the story to reach its final, most meaningful chapter. The pressed flower had faded with time, yet it had not lost its shape. Its color had softened into gentle shades, but every delicate petal remained carefully preserved. It was almost as if the writer wanted to leave behind proof that beautiful things do not have to stay untouched to remain meaningful. Some things become even more precious simply because they have been carried through time. Don't skip, because the next words were never meant to impress anyone. They were meant to stay true. Beneath the flower, the handwriting returned, calmer than ever before. I found this on a day when everything felt uncertain. I almost walked past it. But something encouraged me to keep it. I didn't know why until much later. The letter paused again. Now I understand. It reminded me that the gentlest things often survive the longest. Then came a realization that had clearly taken many quiet days to understand. My feelings were never built on one unforgettable moment. They were built on hundreds of ordinary moments that slowly became extraordinary because you were part of them. The writer began remembering little details no one else would have noticed. The conversation that lasted only a few minutes but stayed in their thoughts for weeks. The kindness you showed without realizing someone needed it. The way hope seemed easier to believe whenever your name quietly crossed their mind. None of these moments demanded attention. Yet together, they became the story their heart could never forget. Something important is waiting for you. The next paragraph carried a peaceful certainty. I used to wonder whether love always had to be loud. I don't believe that anymore. I think the deepest kind of love is often quiet. It listens. It waits. It celebrates your happiness even when no one is watching. It never keeps score. It simply chooses to remain kind. For several lines, the letter said nothing about the future. Instead, it focused entirely on gratitude. Thank you for unknowingly teaching me patience. Thank you for reminding me that sincerity still exists. Thank you for becoming part of my story long before either of us understood why. Then the handwriting changed once again. Not because the writer became uncertain. Because emotion had slowed every movement of the pen. One sentence stretched across the page. I made a promise to myself. Below it came another pause. If life ever gave me the chance to be honest with you, I would never hide behind fear again. Stay till the end. Because that promise was only the beginning. At the very bottom of the page, almost hidden near the corner, there was one final note written after everything else had already been finished. It looked as though the writer had picked up the letter one last time before folding it away. The note simply said, "There is one memory I have never written down, because every time I try, my heart tells me it deserves its own page." The next sheet was completely different from all the others. At the top, there was no greeting. No explanation. Only a single date. A date that quietly marked the exact day the writer realized this was no longer just a letter, it had become the beginning of a love story they hoped you would one day understand. The date stood alone at the top of the page, almost untouched by the surrounding silence. There was no explanation beside it, no reminder of the month or the season. The writer seemed to believe that if you truly reached this page, the numbers themselves would matter less than what they represented. They marked the day an ordinary life quietly became extraordinary without anyone else noticing. Don't skip, because this memory was never shared with another soul. I almost missed that day. Those were the first words beneath the date. It looked like every other day. The sky was ordinary. My schedule was ordinary. Even my thoughts felt ordinary. Nothing around me suggested that I would carry that day with me for the rest of my life. Then the letter slowed again. But then you smiled. Not a dramatic moment. Not a perfect scene. Just a simple smile that lasted only a few seconds. I don't think you knew what it meant. You smiled because that is simply who you are. But for reasons I still cannot explain, that small moment stayed with me long after everything else faded. The writer admitted they had replayed that memory more times than they could count. Not because they wished to change it, but because it reminded them that the most meaningful moments rarely announce themselves while they are happening. Something important is waiting for you. I realized something later. I wasn't remembering your smile. I was remembering how peaceful I felt when I saw it. Those words changed the entire tone of the letter. It was no longer about admiration from a distance. It was about discovering a place where the heart could finally rest. You never promised to solve my worries. You never tried to become someone extraordinary. You simply reminded me that kindness still exists. And somehow, that was enough. The handwriting became lighter. Almost joyful. I used to think love arrived like a sudden storm. Now I think it arrives like sunrise. So quietly that you don't notice the darkness has disappeared until everything around you is already glowing. For several lines, the writer described dreams that were wonderfully ordinary. Sharing peaceful mornings. Laughing over forgotten stories. Walking without needing constant conversation. Celebrating small victories. Growing older without losing gratitude for simple days. None of these dreams were grand. That was exactly why they mattered. Stay till the end. Because after writing about every hope they quietly carried, the writer reached the final corner of the page and added one sentence that looked as though it had been written after a long moment of reflection. If this letter has reached your hands, then perhaps it is finally time for you to know the one truth I protected more carefully than any other. The page ended there. No confession followed. Only the gentle outline of another folded sheet tucked behind it. Unlike every page before, this one had only 3 handwritten words visible before it was opened. Read this last. The final folded sheet felt different the moment it was unfolded. Every page before it had been filled with memories, quiet hopes, and carefully protected truths. This one carried no hesitation. It was as though the writer had finally reached the place where nothing more needed to be hidden. Don't skip, because these were the words they had trusted only to time until now. At the top of the page, there was no date. No greeting. No title. Only one sentence. If you are reading this, then thank you for giving my heart the chance to be understood. The handwriting was steady. Calm. Certain. I once believed love was measured by how loudly someone expressed it. I was wrong. I think love is measured by the peace someone leaves behind after they walk away. The letter lingered there for a moment, allowing those words to breathe. Whenever I thought of you, I never felt the need to become someone else. I never felt the need to pretend. I simply felt like the truest version of myself. That realization, they admitted, had taken a long time to understand. The world often encourages people to impress one another. But the heart quietly searches for something entirely different. Someone who makes honesty feel effortless. Someone who makes silence comfortable. Someone whose presence feels like coming home after a long journey. Something important is waiting for you. The next paragraph was written almost like a promise. If life gives us only conversations, I will treasure them. If life gives us shared memories, I will protect them. If life gives us distance for a while, I will still wish you peace. And if life ever allows our paths to walk side by side, I will never take that gift for granted. There was no pressure hidden inside those words. Only gratitude. Only hope. Only kindness. The writer paused again before adding something that seemed deeply personal. I stopped asking whether you would understand my heart. I started asking whether my heart had been honest. That question changed everything. Because honesty, they realized, does not depend on certainty. It depends on courage. Stay till the end. Near the bottom of the page, tucked into the final paragraph, was the smallest handwriting in the entire letter. It almost disappeared into the paper. I hope this letter never becomes something that makes you feel responsible. I hope it simply reminds you that your kindness reached farther than you ever knew. I hope that whenever life feels uncertain, you remember there is someone in this world who sincerely wishes good things for you. The final lines carried no dramatic ending. No impossible promises. No grand farewell. Only a quiet truth. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. But I know this. Meeting you became one of the gentlest chapters of my life. And whether our story continues through shared days or simply through grateful memories, I will always be thankful that one ordinary day gave me a reason to write this extraordinary letter. At the very bottom, beneath every paragraph, beneath every carefully chosen word, there was finally a signature. Not a name. Just 6 simple words, written with unmistakable sincerity. With all the kindness in my heart. Long after the signature, it would have been easy to believe the story had finally come to its peaceful conclusion. Anyone else might have folded the pages, smiled quietly, and placed them away. But there was one last discovery waiting for the patient reader. It was so carefully hidden that it could only be found by someone who lingered over every page instead of rushing to the end. Don't skip, because sometimes the smallest note becomes the one remembered forever. As the final sheet was lifted, something gently slipped free. It wasn't another letter. It wasn't a photograph. It was a tiny handwritten card, no larger than the palm of a hand, tucked between the pages so delicately that it almost seemed to belong there from the very beginning. Across the front, only 5 words had been written. In case you kept reading. The handwriting carried a quiet smile. I wondered if anyone would ever reach this little note. If you have, then perhaps you understand something about me already. I've always believed the most meaningful people are the ones who stay a little longer. They notice what others overlook. They hear what was never spoken. They value what cannot be measured. The card continued with remarkable simplicity. I don't know which part of this letter you'll remember. Maybe it will be a memory. Maybe it will be a sentence. Maybe it will simply be the feeling it leaves behind. But if even one page made your heart feel a little lighter, then every moment spent writing these words was worthwhile. Something important is waiting for you. The final message was not about the past. Nor was it about tomorrow. It was about this very moment. Life gives us countless chances to hurry. But only a few chances to truly pause. Thank you for pausing here. For giving quiet words your attention. For allowing kindness to finish its sentence. The writer admitted there had been one final question they almost included at the beginning of the letter but decided to save until the very end. Not because they expected an answer. Because some questions are beautiful simply to carry. If our paths had crossed in a different season of life, would we still have recognized the peace we found in each other's presence? The card ended with another long pause. Then, beneath that question, a final handwritten thought appeared. Perhaps the answer doesn't matter as much as this. Some people enter your story to remind you that genuine hearts still exist. You became that reminder for me. And I hope, in some quiet way, this letter becomes that reminder for you too. Folded into the corner of the card was one last tiny sentence, almost hidden from view. The story was never really about a letter. It was always about finding the courage to let kindness be seen.